Welcome back to State of the Nation. Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips may be on the brink of resignation over her handling of the grooming gang's national inquiry. But make no mistake, this is Sir Keir Starmer's fault and not Jess Phillips's. Now, 5 grooming gang survivors have resigned from the inquiry panel, citing a proposed widening of the scope and downplaying of ethnicity and religion in preliminary proceedings. Here was Jess Phillips' response earlier this week.
We must avoid delays, as was seen in the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, and are progressing as swiftly as thoroughness allows. Misinformation undermines this process. Allegations of intentional delay, lack of interest, or widening of the inquiry scope and dilution are false. The inquiry will remain laser-focused on grooming gangs, as Baroness Casey recommended.
She did go on to clarify she was not referring to victims when alluding to the spreading of misinformation, but then things became impassioned.
I have said that 1,000,000 times from this dispatch box, and yet the same thing gets peddled again and again.
It's very clear this issue matters to Jess Phillips and has done really through her whole career. Fighting for the victims of sexual violence has been her life's work. But I know as a former minister that sensitive political issues like this are not being decided by junior ministers. The decisions are being taken by number 10 Downing Street. And it's for that reason it's no wonder things are descending into chaos. Need I remind you of this almighty screeching U-turn?
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right.
A bandwagon of the far right, that was what the Prime Minister called it. And before this, or after this, he had a dramatic change of heart and put it slightly differently.
On the basis of what she's found, she says there should be a national inquiry. I've looked at her report. I've considered that material. I think she's right, and that's why there'll be a national inquiry.
But he didn't really want the inquiry, did he? Look at him there. He rejects having had to do it. He felt under pressure. So could we ever have really expected this inquiry to go well under the leadership of the man who thought its entire cause was far right? He hasn't suddenly become a far right figure himself. And so the chaos we now see unfolding is caused by the fact that there was never the political will from the very top of the government. And now Jess Phillips, the junior minister, whose life has been defined by her work for victims of sexual abuse, gets wheeled out to clear up the mess caused by Sir Keir Starmer and his inner circle of rather incompetent advisers. Phillips becomes the scapegoat for number 10's failures. Indeed. And any minister watching knows how this works. She has to defend things that were not her choice, that had she had the choice, she would have chosen something different, and those choices would probably have been better, more effective, and earlier. It is Starmer's inner circle that never wanted the inquiry in the first place because it couldn't face up to the political inconvenience of this scandal, the inconvenience that shattered the multicultural mass migration mythology. As always, let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Earlier today, a group of 5 survivors on the national inquiry wrote to the Prime Minister saying they would only continue if Jess Phillips remains in post. And I'm joined now by the only one who has waived her right to anonymity, Samantha Walker-Roberts. Samantha, thank you very much for joining me. Could you set out why you think it's important Jess Phillips continues?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's important for Jess to stay part of this because she's been there from the beginning. She understands what we've been through. She's been there supportive behind closed doors. She's offered any support that we've needed. And she's stayed completely independent from this whole process.
I've always got the impression from Jess Phillips that this is a matter that has always been close to her heart, that she has campaigned in support of women who have been abused since before she entered Parliament. Why do you think she's coming under such pressure from other people?
I think it's because she seems to be the main point of contact for all of us survivors. And she's kind of getting the brunt of everything at the moment from everybody because she can't give answers. And it's understandable why she can't, because they're out of her jurisdiction.
And that's the point, isn't it? I think you put your finger on it, that when you're a government minister, you're only allowed to say what you're allowed to say by Downing Street. And I imagine that Jess must be champing at the bit to say and do more, and would be feeling very let down by how Downing Street is behaving.
Yeah, in January, when it was announced about the national inquiry, we was having a meeting with Jess as it was being publicised at that same time, and Jess couldn't disclose what had happened due to the fact that it hadn't been heard in Parliament yet, and a lot of survivors felt that there was a cover-up and something was going on, but it was just due to the fact that she couldn't disclose it to us.
And what would you like to see happen? How do you think the inquiry should go so that people who have been the victims of the most awful crimes get full information and an assurance that it won't happen in future?
This national inquiry is the first of its kind, and it needs to make sure that it covers all forms of CSE. Like myself, my case isn't straightforward. It doesn't follow this narrative. It's a grey area, and there's many more that follow. And this inquiry needs to ensure that all survivors have a voice and that everybody gets justice.
And that seems to be the point that Jess Phillips has been arguing for, that all the people who have been victims of this should have the opportunity to have their case considered, and that not everybody fits into one pattern. There are variants on the pattern, and you mentioned that that's true of your own case.
Yeah, and that's a huge problem. Obviously, not everybody is in that stereotypical grooming by a gang kind of thing. Mine was an individual that groomed me over a period of 12 months, and a gang had kidnapped me for a 24-hour ordeal, so that didn't involve grooming. Now, they could have acted as a lone wolf. We don't know, and if that can't be part of the inquiry, we'll never find out.
No, indeed. And has anybody been arrested or prosecuted for the abuse that you suffered from?
Just 2 out of 11.
2 out of 11. So there's still an awful lot that needs to be done. And there's a lot of distrust, quite understandably, of the authorities, because so many of the authorities at the time took no serious action, didn't do their jobs properly.
They didn't, but I had to have a lot of trust when it was the Andy Burnham Assurance Review, and they had hired Gary Ridgway and Malcolm Newton, who was ex-police and ex-social. And surprisingly, throughout that review, they found out information that I was never able to find out. And that has led to many prosecutions for other survivors within the Oldham Borough. So having that trust in them has led to multiple prosecutions.
Yes. Well, Samantha Walker-Roberts, thank you so much for joining me. I cannot tell you how much I admire your courage for being willing to come on and talk about the terrible experience you have had and for making your views clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm now joined by my panel, Nigel Nelson and Tom Pursglove. Tom, I want to come to you first because the Conservatives have called for Jess Phillips to resign. This is a bit ridiculous, isn't it? Because we know perfectly well that she's not making the decisions. You were Immigration Minister, you were in this situation, you had to go out to bat for stupid decisions being made by children in Downing Street. And if every minister who ever did that had resigned, we wouldn't have many ministers left.
So I can definitely relate to that
could.
analysis, that is fair to say. But I don't think that Jess's tone in the Commons helped this week. I don't think getting in the wrangle with survivors has been at all helpful. And the problem comes when the minister indefinitely becomes the story. Because this issue is far too serious for this to run on indefinitely. We need to get to the truth. I think there are things that government can do to try and course correct on this, have this as a judge-led inquiry, make sure it's timely, be very tight in terms of the scope. But this starts with a trust deficit because the shambolic way in which this has been handled. You touched on the fact that ministers were dragged into this, but that direction, as you rightly touch on, was set from number 10. Jess is taking responsibility for that in terms of scrutiny, but ultimately, as a government minister, you hemmed him.
And to be fair to her, didn't the brouhaha in the House of Commons just show she feels very strongly about this and that she is genuinely concerned? She's not a minister who reads her brief and goes into the chamber and just, without any emotion, sets it out. She really believes in what she's doing.
Oh, definitely. And from my experience as someone who served in the Home Office and in the Ministry of Justice dealing with victims' issues, Jess was always someone who would really hold your feet to the fire in terms of the steps that you were taking, the way in which you were approaching those issues and driving you hard to try and deliver on the promises that you made. She feels enormously strongly about this, but I also think that inevitably that means that if she is a blocker to this moving forward, I do actually think that she would take the step to resign because she cares so much about this.
Nigel, Downing Street inevitably makes serious policy decisions like this. It was very reluctant to have an inquiry. That wasn't great for trust, was it? And that it's got to do a lot of recovery from its earlier position.
Yeah, I mean, the reason for opposing the inquiry in the first place was the Alexis J inquiry, which took 7 years, and we still haven't implemented the recommendations of that. The danger of a new inquiry is that will delay those recommendations a bit further. I agree with you. I think that Jess Phillips shouldn't resign. I think she's doing her best in the circumstances, but the problem you've got here, as we can see, is not all the survivors agree with each other. So if you've got 4 who say the inquiry shouldn't be expanded and Jess should go, and 5 who say the inquiry should be expanded and Jess should stay, what you've got to do somewhere along the line is get those 2 sides together.
I wonder if it's true of all of us that we haven't quite fully comprehended the degree of awfulness of this scandal, that it's 1,400 abused in one of the areas. The numbers are staggering, and it's taken years and years for anything to happen. I just wonder whether there's a point at which problems get so big that people don't know what to do, and this affected us when we were in government, and it's now affecting Labour.
Well, I still think your problem area is going to be with the survivors. I mean, Jim Gamble, one of the prospective chairmen, was on GB News yesterday. He sounded like an ideal person to chair the inquiry, but he said, quite rightly, if some of the survivors don't have confidence in him, he would have to go. So the job that Jess has got, and I think that Jess is the only one who can really do it, is to sit down with the survivors and with the different factions and try and bring them together with an inquiry that they can all accept.
And these are, of course, people who have been through the most terrible thing, and therefore, quite rightly, there's a sensitivity to what they want to try and put it right after years when the state allowed this abuse to go on. It wasn't creating it, but it turned a blind eye to it.
And this is why the principal focus has to be on carrying the confidence of the survivors. And all of this comes back to that. And so I would hope that there will be a coming together, getting people around the table and trying to make the progress, exactly as Nigel has just touched on, that I think all of us would want to see. And the reason why it's so important that we have that national inquiry, and I understand that ministers didn't want to progress down that route initially, but I sat in this studio months ago and said it was inevitable that this was where we would end up, because we had a whole slew of fresh allegations that added a whole new layer of scandal to this. Talk of cover-up, conspiracy, that is horrendous. It has to be got to the bottom of. And also, that's important, not just for getting justice for the survivors, but also to make sure that young people in our communities up and down the country are protected in the here and now.
But inquiries, we've got the COVID inquiry, we've got the infected blood inquiry, we've got so many inquiries going on. What was it Harold Wilson said about them taking minutes and lasting years that actually don't get us anywhere? How can we be confident that an inquiry will actually make any difference?
Well, the first thing, and this goes back to the Alexis J situation, the first thing is, the most important thing is to protect children. And to protect children in the future, if we had the Child Protection Agency that was recommended up and running, that would help.
All right.